Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed some fresh air or a cup of coffee. We're excited to introduce the following session that will feature 3 talks. And we decided for this session to bring together all speakers at the very end of the session for a shared Q&A. So please still submit your questions into the Q&A box. We will collect them and then we'll have a little mini panel at the end of this session.
So we're honored now to introduce the next 2 speakers, Sanneke Stichter and IJsbrand Hummelen. Hello. Hi, Sanneke. Hi, IJsbrand. Sanneke Stichter is Assistant Professor, Conservation and Restoration of Cultural Heritage at the University of Amsterdam. She was formerly head of Conservation of Contemporary Art and Modern Sculpture at the Kröller-Müller Museum.
And IJsbrand Hummelen is Senior Research Conservator at the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands since 1992. He was one of the founding partners of the EU project Modern Art Who Cares and the Inca Network. Sanneke and IJsbrand will share their memories about the development of contemporary art conservation in the Netherlands. Sanneke and IJsbrand, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martina and Martina, especially for organizing this conference, and also the previous speakers for setting the stage for this presentation. This presentation will provide a perspective on research practices that have nourished the development of contemporary art conservation in the Netherlands prior to my own training in this specialization at the SRAL in Maastricht in the Netherlands at the same time of as the Bern program. A key figure in the development of contemporary art conservation methodology is IJsbrand Hummelen. You see him here in 1973 when he joined the Central Research Laboratory for Objects of Art and Science, of which you will hear more. Now, this is a story that signals 2 important features from the development of our field, namely the decision-making model and an anthropological approach. In this context, 2 more key figures need to be introduced. The late Professor Ernst van Wetering, an art historian who also worked at the Central Laboratory, and Professor Dr. René van der Val of Maastricht University. It is Ernst van Wetering who drafted a model for decisions in conservation restoration. And this was based on the practices as they took place in the Central Laboratory, especially 2 case studies that IJsbrand will elaborate on: a Pabuchi scroll painting from India and a Piero Manzoni agrome from the Stedelijk Museum collection. That all happened at the Central Research Laboratory. And this is where you worked, IJsbrand.
Thank you, Sanneke, for your introduction. Yes, I bring you back, as you saw it already on the photograph, to the 70s and even the early 60s in Amsterdam. Flower power years, and at that time exactly this institute was founded, the Central Laboratories, and there were as a research institute, no education, no museum, but for the whole Netherlands, and actually everything had to be invented here, but it started with two apartments, a science department and a conservation research department. And the conservation research department were kind of studios, where research on conservation methods was conducted, and laboratories. And it started actually with the initial approach, you could say, was what at that time the criticism said was the chemical solution. and the chemicals of conservation. And the chemical solution was, for instance, very positivistic in synthetic materials. So polychrome sculptures were impregnated with resins, for instance, and synthetic materials. And that there was a lot of friction there. And in this very informal, young institute, a lot of tensions emerged there. And then in 1968, Ernst van Wetering, an art historian, came there, and then a new department was founded, the art historical department. And Ernst immediately he started to organize in the studios interdisciplinary meetings around the objects. And for that, he did extensive preparatory studies in making processes, the history and the biography of the objects, and also context, meaning. And he made a lot of notes and was compiling dossiers there. And during and even after the treatments and the research, he was also making notes about consideration processes. Two case studies I will discuss here, and you see also that he made a lot of publications from those case studies or from certain aspects what's happening in those projects. So one is this conservation treatment of a Pabucci scroll painting. And that it's the painting you see here at the backdrop to illustrate the Pabucci epic in a dance, song, and music performance still used by the traveling Bopas. That is, the Bopas is the storyteller here. And they are traveling storytellers in Rajasthan in India. So here also Ernst, and the object is from the World Museum in Amsterdam. And Ernst organized here also as a stakeholders network, you could say. Bopa Prabhu, who you see here, was part of it. So he came also over to the Netherlands. I maybe tell a little bit later there. He was the performer, but also a professor in Sanskrit from Cambridge, anthropologist, ethnomusicologists, curators, scientists, and conservators. They were all involved in this project. Well, the main topic, I think I was there also in these discussions, was the biases in the practice of the research and conservation. So our biases, why did we use, and as you see here, this whole project actually, or let's say the conversation was between 1972 and 1987 when he published his articles, and then after 1987 he became art history professor. So, but in 1987 he also published extensively on this thing. It was very informal. Prabhu, for instance, he lived in my house. And you really have to place it in the 70s, the early 70s, and all those people came along, and we more or less lived together for a while. And the other case is an Agrom by Piero Manzoni from the State Museum, and a monochrome white painting, a typical, zero painting, very sensitive surface, very absorbent, and it had stains on it, and it came from the State Museum. And Manzoni, he passed away already in 1963, so he was not available to consult him. And also here, Van Wetering mobilized a whole network of stakeholders, like the friends of Manzoni, Jan Schoonhoven and Henk Peters. And they, had already, for instance, Schoonhoven had already overpainted one Manzoni in collaboration with Manzoni himself. And they also reproduced or reenacted their own works. But in this whole group were also the gallerists, collectors, curators, and Ernst conducted a lot of interviews here. Here the topics were concept, reenactment, authenticity, patina, and presence and experience. And here also you see 1974 to 1986, he also here still is publishing about it, and Ernst and me, we had continuously conversations about these problems. Then in 1986, Ernst is organizing together with other people a meeting for ICOM-CC, the theoretical group, a meeting of academics in Amsterdam with a lot of academics, so professors in anthropology, philosophy, a whole group, I think about 20 people, and they made also notes of that. And here, this is, I think, the sketch he made from that, kind of first sketch for a kind of decision model. And in 1906 as well, there was a huge, you could say, a catastrophe. The Barnett Newman in the Stedelijk Museum was sliced, this raised a lot of public controversies and public dialogues in the newspapers and everywhere. And well, probably you know, this painting was overpainted by a conservator, and again similar, of course. A discussion was what we had with the Manzoni. At that time also, it was, because it was also in the politics, a real had its influences. So our institute, we were asked to arrange something, a project on conservation of modern and contemporary art, and that's what we started with. With 10 museums, they all brought in their objects, and they all, the conservators and the curators, you know, were part of the project. So it was a kind of field, you could say, field lab. Here you see in one of the meetings, here you see exactly what happens. Oh, not exactly, of course, but what happens there. We were all around the object, we were discussing it, but now we had the help also of René van der Val, the philosopher who had made her PhD on Barnett Newman, so that's why she was involved in it. And she joined us here, and also because she was familiar with all kinds of qualitative techniques, and in Maastricht, in Maastricht there was a long tradition also already in science and technology studies. So we recorded all those meetings and we made transcriptions. And from those meetings and from those recordings, there we analyzed this, what happening actually was exactly, what were the topics here. And from this, the project we organized later, of course, not we, but it was, well, an EU project where we could present all those case studies. And then, of course, a lot of people, international people, partners in the Modern Art Project, like the Tate and Guggenheim, Babel, and in Germany, everywhere. And then a huge, of course, we had this discussion, and they were all parts of it. It was not a conference, you know, before everybody had to think of a certain topic to think for the future, like this beautiful, what you do now, this conference here. Then René later organized also, together with us, all the projects, new strategies of conservation project, and we can come now more and more to the 90s and the 20 and the zero. So maybe you can tell something about your time as a student.
Yeah, I think thanks so much, IJsbrand, because you've showed a wonderful history, a 50-year history almost of the development of an anthropological approach in conservation, of course, with a lot of nourishing from the whole network, which is where René van der Val took over together with you to develop these new strategies in conservation of contemporary art, which was the springboard for later projects, of course, including NACA and so on. And I think that Christine Vronet will fill us in more on what comes next. So many things.